Redditors, what's the worst thing you've eaten out of politeness?
This one's actually kinda funny. My grandma died right before Christmas. We all got together for the holiday and my aunt was understandably still taking it really hard. She'd made something she called vanilla angel food pudding cake. It was in a shallow casserole dish. Top layer was whipped cream and cookie crumble. Middle layer was vanilla pudding. Bottom layer was crumbled angel food cake. Soaked to the top in a massive pool of bourbon. The cake was floating in the bourbon. We'd later found out she'd mixed even more bourbon into the pudding layer. She didn't tell anyone it was alcoholic, so we all got scoops assuming it was a syrup or something. My cousin was the first to bite into it and had to run to the trash can to vomit as soon as it got in her mouth. Another person got a forkful near their nose and freaked out and yelled in shock. Cue my aunt beginning to completely melt down about how she's trying so hard and she got the recipe from a friend and it's not that much alcohol and grandma was such a good cook she would have helped her etc, like full blown about to lose it. The cousin that vomited tried to claim it was something else while the yeller tried to play off that they saw a bug across the room. Everyone else was sufficiently guilted into eating at least some of what they'd scooped onto their plates. That shit was physically painful to eat. Everything burned. Looking around the table you would have thought we were all downing spoonfuls of wasabi. I was 19B. I guess my parents were more worried about my aunt than me getting underaged sloshed on pudding, but about halfway through my portion they found a discreet way to dump my plate.
My grandmother's chili. My grandmother is a terrible, terrible cook. I've gotten food poisoning multiple times from her, but this chili nearly killed me. She made it in her crock pot. I lived with my grandparents, my younger sister and our mom at the time. My mom was out of town. The first night the chili was good. Everything was fine. She made a huge batch so we had it again the next day. It was still okay, a little bit off but not the worst thing I ever ate. I was so sick that night. Spewing from both ends. The third night the smell was horrible, the chili was popping and effervescence with tiny gas bubbles. I was 9, we had just learned about bacteria in school. I refused to eat more than a bite. It was Pop Rocks mixed with rotten meat. I asked her how she stored the chili. In the crockpot, she said defensively. It's okay to leave things in there. I even remembered to unplug it. We lived in Georgia, it was the summer. She didn't make chili, she made a science experiment on the kitchen counter. The most fucked up dinner I have ever seen. 2 years ago I was invited by my best friend and her family to spend Christmas with them. Her grandparents were the sweetest old people you could think of, so I was exited, even though I normally hate Christmas. The only problem was my best friend's father. He was an old, alcoholic asshole, who was mostly separated of the rest of the family and luckily ignored me most of the time. But his white trash girlfriend, best friend's mother died. Thought it would be a delight to invite me and BF to a Christmas dinner. God, it was a shit show start to finish. I have a very strong stomach, but after that I felt nauseous. A goose that was dry, with congealed fat throughout, red cabbage made with fucking mulled wine spice, and the worst lasagna I have ever seen. The only good thing was that the dinner happened at trash girlfriend's home, so we could get away after that and get drunk afterwards. God, it was so disgusting it still upsets me thinking about it. My family was very strict about wasting food. My dad was the type to say things like, if you vomit, I will make you eat it. When we thought food was too gross to eat, like boiled spinach, it didn't help my father's mom was the type who'd make him take ice baths for bad behavior back in the old country, and he'd follow through. On my mom's side my grandfather said things like, if you drop your food on the floor, I'll pick it up and you'll eat it anyway. My grandmother was the type to clean super thoroughly, but they were legit migrant farmers, so wasting food was super taboo. One day around 12-13 years old my friend invited me over for dinner at his place. His mom was an amazing cook. 15 years later she's still the only woman who can cook me fish that I will happily eat. So I'm 100% down for dinner. We get there and she's got the dinner table covered end to end in fresh ingredients. She's chopping and cooking away like a kitchen monster. I'm excited. 2 or 3 hours goes by and food is ready. We go over and grab bowls and we sit down. I take my first bite and immediately my mouth is ablaze with Cantonese fire. My friend looks at me and says, Is it too spicy? Choking a little and starting to sweat, I shake my head. I need finish this bowl. I get 3 bites in and I'm breaking already. I get up and grab a glass of water and try again, and again, and again. Halfway through the bowl my eyes are streaming and his mom takes me to her room and starts holding me while I sob full-bodied racking sobs. She pet my hair and started singing to me softly till I settled down. She was always super strict with everybody, but this little moment just kinda broke my heart. Eventually she got me to get it together and told me it was okay if I didn't finish my food, she wouldn't tell anybody and whatnot. She was always super kind to me after that, and I felt kinda bad about visiting when she'd be strict with my friend but not me. To this day she still holds a special admiration in my heart and I still miss seeing her. This was my dad eating it rather than me, but I was a witness. I have 2 older sisters. When the elder of them decided that she wanted to cook a meal for the family, it was a big deal. She decided to make chili, and she used my mom's Big Red Betty Crocker cookbook, or similar, but one of those generic cookbooks most families have, for the recipe. At one point it calls for a whole heap of chili powder, and this is where things went wrong. She used the chili powder from our kitchen drawer. Seems fair, right? Except my dad is Pakistani and it was some sort of incredibly intense chilies or something like that. Bear in mind that at this point I was, like, 8 or younger, so my grasp of the details was minimal. All I knew was that you couldn't even go near the pot. Breathing the air in the kitchen was an experience. The entire family just noped out. Nice try, let's order a pizza. You can give it a go again next week. Except for my dad. He was determined that his daughter had cooked dinner and he was going to eat that dinner. He ate it. He ate the whole pot. But at the end, his face was Crayola fire engine red and there was sweat pouring off of him. We would ask if he was okay, and he would croak out, "Yes. It's very good," in a tone which implied he was fighting for each moment of survival. I don't even want to consider what his gut was like for the rest of that week. But his daughter cooked him dinner and he ate the whole pot. A very garlicky carbonara. My sister's boyfriend offered to make a carbonara for our family and we accepted as we had heard good things about his cooking from my sister. He bought the pre-chopped garlic that comes in a container where they are separated into portions, kind of in a grid setup of mini 1-portion garlic all connected. There's about 30 per pack minimum. Now I am not adverse to garlic, in fact I myself often put in more than the recommended when I cook, but holy shit. This was bad. Turns out he had used all 30 portions of garlic to make a carbonara for 8 people. He had also used a certain kind of mature cheese which gave everything a nasty aftertaste. Overall, we haven't let him cook food for us again, but he doesn't know why.
Girlfriend in college wanted to be nice to my roommate and I because she often ate over at our apartment, so she was to cook dinner one night. Teriyaki steak. Somewhere along the line, she got TBSP and cup mixed up, and added 3/4 cup of salt. Pretty sure we were nearing the LD50 of salt for a human, but I ate as much as I could, and drank as much water as I could for the next few days.
Several years ago, I visited my partner's grandmother in small-town Missouri. Part of our visit was going to the grandmother's sister's house in the next town over. They were very kind people. But at lunch, there was Jell-O salad that had white mystery fibers in it. I suspect it was something like cottonwood, or some other airborne fluff that just happened to get in the gelatin. I quickly realized A, it was harmless, B, it didn't taste like anything, and C, I should just politely pick it out of my mouth when people weren't looking. Gochujang jjajang. Honestly, it's a Korean delicacy which is raw crab marinated in soy sauce, marinated and then not cooked, something like Peru's ceviche. I've lived half my life outside Korea and don't take too well to raw Korean dishes. But I was visiting a friend and her dad offered me some because it's her hometown delicacy and it is an expensive dish. It was not too bad. I wasn't gagging or anything like that, but I really don't like seafood in general, so wasn't a neat experience. There's also yangnyeon jjajang, which is the same thing but a spicy version of it. Look the dish up, it looks weird. There are some YouTube videos of it as well of foreigner trying it. Edit. Raw crab is apparently not too gross sounding by the comments I get. I'd also like to share a Korean snack that I will never ever try, but a lot of people like it. Bondogi, literally pupa, is a Korean street food made with silkworm pupae. It is usually sold from the street vendors. The boiled or steamed snack food is served in paper cups with toothpick skewers. Canned bondogi can also be found in grocery stores and convenience stores. From Wikipedia. Reply. Not so bad as some of the others, but I once was visiting family in Scotland with my grandparents. At the time, age 12 or so, I was a fairly picky eater, so when we went over for dinner, they had lamb for everyone else and peanut butter sandwiches for me. Not wanting to appear rude, and wanting to seem adventurous, I decided to go for the lamb. Unfortunately, the first few bites made it clear to me that lamb was not a good fit for my tastes. Nevertheless, I followed the classic mantra of improvise, adapt, overcome. Looking around the table, I spotted a convenient pitcher of water and hatched a plan. I cut off a suitably small bit of lamb and placed it in my mouth. I would then thoughtfully pretend to chew and swallow, then casually grab a sip of water. In reality, I was gumming the lamb, then swallowing it whole. Of course, by the end of the meal, I'd gone through 3 cups of water, nearly half the pitcher. Nevertheless, my ruse apparently worked because when I revealed my scheme several days later, my grandparents seemed suitably surprised. Finally, a place to tell this story. I had a friend that I carpooled with in college. She couldn't drive, so she started making me lunches. One day I opened the lunch bag she made for me and there is a ball of tin foil. Inside said foil is an onion. I thought to myself it would be rude not to eat this since clearly she intended me to eat this and I didn't know enough about her culture then to be able to say for sure that it was not a cultural thing. She also wasn't there to defend her choice, so I took a few bites before I reached my limit and threw it out. Later she asked me how I liked my muffin. Muffin? What muffin? You know, the muffin that was wrapped in tin foil? Apparently, her brother had eaten the muffin and replaced it with an onion to cover his tracks and she didn't notice when she stuffed the bags. TL, doctor, wait for it, I put a load up front to explain stuff. Let me preface, my grandfather married my grandmother after eating her food at a returning GI event. He chased her down in his truck across the mountain she lived on and asked for her hand at the summit. I always thought this was a cute story. She was a whiz in the kitchen, could cook for an army. It took me till college to learn you could cook for less than 20 people at a time. She'd portion and chill, freeze meals, and when she passed there was about a year and a half worth of her meals all prepped in deep freezers. Got to live like home for a couple months. I had gone to many homes and eaten a lot of, well, subpar food in comparison. Ma'am, we called her that because it was all my grandfather called her, she called him Pa, was amazing, and her sons and daughters can all cook well as most grandchildren. So, when my mother decided to take us to the small town where my grandmother and grandfather were born and raised, I was excited. I had heard legends about the place, the family on the hill that could speak to bees, the young school teacher who drove a VW bug like a slalom up and down mountain passes dodging coal trucks. And the food. We went down and were greeted at every home with something to eat. Now, Appalachian and Southern homes commonly greet guests with some small foodstuff, but these houses had been decked out. My family and folk were apparently minor celebrities for getting out, and they returned regularly to help out those in need in a town where the number kept growing and growing. To paraphrase my folks, we were never rich, never poor, but we had a roof, and the fellowship of charity. Each family we came to had amazing food. Pies I still put up to any I've had in my life. This one family gave us fried chicken that I assume could raise the dead to eat it. A butcher who learned his trade after getting out of the mine served up slices of a steak cooked on a Franklin stove for us to try. At every house we were asked where we'd be dining for supper. Well, if you stay a while, I learned you sort to do the circuit, choose a few houses, bring some kindnesses, and make your keep talking and helping out then eat supper. But, since we were back for my first time since I was a toddler, my mom said we'd be eating with my pa's family in the holler. We rounded up the day and got to Mam's folks, and they had a spread. By this time we were quite full, but the running and talking helped. They understood and didn't give us the look of shame you may get for denying food. At the end of it my great-uncle, a preacher by trade, came up with a kerchief. In it were tied up 2 country biscuit and ham sandwiches. He gave me a wink and said, "Here's for the road. Or if you want a snack later." Anyways, we crawl up the mountain, top of the hill to the house. It used to be near an old hydrocephaly ward, so a lot of the family had gone into being aides and nurses. From there sprouted a handful of doctors, lab techs, etc. We come around the corner and there's cars and trucks everywhere. Looks like the whole family has shown up. The matriarch, my pa's eldest sister, comes out to greet us, saying she put on a whole turkey dinner, in Thanksgiving for us coming home. Hugs and cheek pinches and feels of the arm to prove I'm not some city boy. I get asked to quote some scripture, to prove I'm not some godless heathen. The family passes around shine and I get my first taste of white lightning, to grow hair on my chest, from a slicked back relative who looks like my pa but in his 20s. Then the feast comes. And it is terrifying. The bird's pale and swollen like a river body, there's a carafe of some sort of turkey-smelling fluid they call stuffing. Rock-hard pones of cornbread are served with I don't wish to believe a just God would let me call this anything but Oleo, and they made some sort of try-it cranberry sauce that tasted like Sour Patch Kids if you removed the salt. We get served from this combo along with those at the main table, but those below don't seem to be doing well either. The entire family tucks in with a grimacing look. They hate it, but they eat it. Dozens of cousins, second cousins, Briar Patch Kids, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren all going through this mutual self-flagellation of the taste buds. I saw a child step into the woods, vomit, then return with tears in his eyes after his mother asked him to keep on eating. We choked it all down while my great-aunt explained how happy she is to see everyone together to see us, how beloved my mother is here, how we should stay with her for a summer, because no one comes to family events anymore unless it's a funeral or a wedding. I came to learn later that those events are served potluck style, and so everyone from all around cooks and comes to the event with a dish, thus avoiding this. But this meal? This was all my great-aunt, trying to be nice. I felt sorry for her. I really did. She maybe never got to learn how to cook properly. Maybe there were other issues, and she was just not good at it. I felt terrible even going down the mountain after, nibbling on one of the biscuit sandwiches and trying to be a good kid and not be mean. 6 months later I cornered Pa and asked him why. Well, his family sucked at cooking. His response, paraphrased: his mom died young, in childbirth. Since then the oldest girl, my great-aunt, took over with the cooking and mending and fixing. She got kicked by a mule as a child and had no sense of smell, so her sense of taste was out there. She'd try to serve food that was far past edible, and the local shopkeepers would actually rip her off by selling things near ready to turn. When I said it was horrible, he told me he married my grandmother after 3 days of being home from the war because if he had to eat a full week's worth of meals at the old house he probably would have offed himself. Just so happened he picked a woman for her layered pudding who was compatible, and they were together for 50+ years until his death. They were together for 50+.
My grandpa made sushi. With tuna, rhubarb, yellow mustard, seaweed, and undercooked rice. Watched me eat it, make sure I got a taste of each ingredient. The entire time I ate it, I thought, this tough bastard made it through the beaches of Normandy, eat the sushi and smile.
One time I volunteered to deliver a prescription after work to this old man cause he lived in the building beside mine. He answers the door with "Oh good, you're here," and ushers me to a table where another reluctant diner appeared to be held hostage as well. He forces us to ingest all of the cold, sweet yellow rice and vile-tasting yogurt he could slop on our plates and would not leave us alone until our plates were clean. I tried to use every excuse in the book, but he kept saying in his culture it's rude not to completely finish your plate, etc. etc. He kept saying it was such a delicacy and blah blah, and I appreciate that in his culture it might be, but I kind of felt violated to be forced to eat something, let alone seeing the giant Tupperware it was scooped out of, not knowing when the hell it was made and arugula ravioli. My husband, then boyfriend, and I were on some tough times. I had been fired and immediately sprained my ankle. He got laid off the next day. 2 weeks later we went to the food bank. They gave us an entire crate of arugula ravioli. We hate arugula. We had both literally asked for a different meal to avoid it being substituted on the side because of a shortage in the larder. I once refused a soup almost in tears because they changed the recipe to include this stirred flavored plant. We ate it for 2 weeks until he got a job and was close to a paycheck. Then he asked his mom for pizza money because we literally couldn't swallow it anymore. It makes a funny story now, and he often retells it. Then it just made me want to puke. When I was growing up in the 80s, I was a chubby kid, and my mother was obese. We tried diets from time to time. There was a fad diet idea that went around where you were supposed to eat one and only one food until you couldn't stand it anymore, then pick another and do the same thing. Supposedly you'd never ever want to eat that thing again, so once you worked your way through all those bad things, you'd be forced to only eat healthy. It's one of those things that sounds ridiculously stupid, but at the time, the way it was written about, she thought it sounded worth a try. Growing up, I hardly ever got to eat sugary cereal, and this was usually fine. I love grape nuts and Raisin Bran and some others. But this was my chance. I picked Cocoa Puffs. So for about 3 weeks, for every single meal, I had Cocoa Puffs. I was kinda tired of them at the end of the 3 weeks, but I was still eating a lot of them. I don't remember what my mother and father picked, but after about 3 weeks, we agreed that while we were tired of our choices, it would take way too long to get through every single bad-for-you food, and the concept was probably crap anyway. Lol. Just to say that even though my situation was self-imposed, well, imposed by parents, and I liked the food okay, I can imagine your pain. Frown, glad you survived. Lol.